So welcome guests and panelists, and good evening to everyone. I'm Karen Peart, Chair of the Fund for Women and Girls. So the title of this evening's program is Women, Work and Equity, Living Wage Employment in Manufacturing and Beyond. And I'd like to extend a warm welcome to all of our guests and panelists. The Community Fund for Women and Girls and the Community Foundation is committed to advancing equity in our region. The post-pandemic structuring of pipelines and pathways to careers and well-paying jobs must include a gender lens. Opportunities for women in manufacturing are promising. I have the distinct pleasure of introducing Yolanda Caldera-Durant, Vice President for Community Strategies. Yolanda is leading the Foundation's efforts to support inclusive career pathways in economic growth sectors in Greater New Haven by connecting residents, in particular women, people of color, immigrants, and people who were formerly incarcerated, to quality jobs that pay a living wage and provide benefits. This work is an important part of the Foundation's commitment to building an inclusive economy and to advance racial and gender equity in our region. Thank you, Yolanda. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Karen. Good evening, everyone. We are pleased to have you join us for this convening. I will review some housekeeping items before we launch into our discussion. So you are all muted. If you're having any difficulties with technology, please contact us in the chat. Also, submit any questions you have for the panel using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. Closed captioning is on. If you'd like to turn it off, you can click on the closed captioning button on the bottom of your screen. So I'm excited to tell you that we have 60 people registered to join us this evening. We may not be able to answer all of your questions, but we'll respond to as many as we can. I would like to provide some framing for tonight's discussion. As part of the Foundation's 3-year Stepping Forward initiative, we are focused on supporting inclusive career pathways in local economic growth sectors that provide quality jobs that pay a living wage with benefits for people of color, women, immigrants, and people who are formerly incarcerated. In the New Haven region, according to the United Way's ALICE data, a household survival budget of $90,000 per year would be needed to support a family with 2 adults, 1 infant, and 1 preschooler. The data shows that local growth sectors that provide these quality jobs include healthcare, biomedical, bioscience, manufacturing, technology, transportation, and construction. This is one of the Foundation's key strategies as part of our response to the pandemic, and also to advance racial equity and to build a truly inclusive economy. The Fund for Women and Girls has been addressing how the pandemic has disproportionately impacted women, particularly women of color, in terms of economic and health impacts. Last year, you may recall, the fund released a report entitled Essential Equity, Women, COVID-19 and Rebuilding Connecticut. You can find this report on the Foundation's website. The report indicates that the pandemic-induced crisis of the economy was termed the she-cession because of its disparate impact on women. Women comprise 49% of the state's labor force. Today, we will have an in-depth discussion with our guest presenters to understand more about what is behind the region's labor shortage and how to best support and invest in women to obtain careers that pay living wages to ensure their family's economic security and our region's economic recovery and growth. Now, I'm pleased to introduce you to our guest speakers. First, we have Marcia LaFemina, who's president and CEO at Pennsylvania Globe Gaslight Company, also known as Penn Globe, the oldest outdoor lighting company in the US. Marcia began her career in this family-owned business as a young woman, learning the operations and systems along the way. Now a second-generation owner, she embraces STEAM concepts and continues to lead the company in developing innovative and environmentally responsible lighting products for the municipal and college markets. Marcia's community leadership includes serving on the board of ManufactureCT. She also chairs ManufactureCT's Workforce Committee. Marcia was recently appointed co-chairperson for the South Central Industrial Sector Partnership. Marcia attended Allegheny College and is a member of Alpha Gamma Delta. Next up is Sarah Lewis, the Director of Apprenticeship Works Program, where she oversees operations of manufacturing and training initiatives for the workplace. The Apprenticeship Works Program connects job seekers with training, career services, and employment opportunities in manufacturing, and connects private sector businesses with public training incentives. Sarah represents the workplace in partnerships with the Southwest Regional Manufacturing Partnership, ManufactureCT's Workforce Committee, and Shelton High School's Career and Technical Education Advisory Council. Sarah holds a bachelor's from Virginia Tech and a master's in public administration from the University of Connecticut. And finally, but not least, is Adrienne Parkmond, who serves as Chief Operating Officer for The Workplace, a nonprofit organization dedicated to providing employment and job training services to adults and youth leaders, youth headquartered in Southwestern Connecticut. During Adrienne's tenure at The Workplace, the organization has evolved into a nationally recognized leader in creating state-of-the-art workforce development programs. Adrienne leads a team of 180 staff in the implementation and operation of over $30 million in grant-funded programs each year. She's responsible for the design of programs for unemployed youth, people with disabilities, veterans, dislocated workers, and mature workers. Adrienne is an associate professor of legal studies at Post University. Adrienne received her bachelor's from Villanova University and her Juris Doctorate from Quinnipiac University Law School. Now let's get started. Welcome. It's great to see your faces.
Thank you.
Let's get started. Adrienne, I'd love to hear from you about what is behind the current labor shortage and who has been most severely impacted, and what do you think needs to be done to address it?
Well, first of all, let me say thank you for having me, Yolanda and Sharon, and all of the folks at the Community Foundation for Greater New Haven, as well as the Fund for Women and Girls. We so appreciate you doing this because it's such an important topic. And I will try, I think, our best to give you what we have. But I think if I could answer that question of what is exactly behind the labor shortage, Yolanda, I probably would be making a whole lot more money somewhere else. But we're going to try to give you some of our insights in terms of what we're seeing here that's going on. So we hear a lot about labor shortage. That's what we hear on the news every day, right? You turn it on, you hear it, and it's real. And for those of us and those of you in the audience and as well as on this panel, I know that are looking for workers, you know that it is real. So let's kind of take a look at quickly. I know we don't want to hear a lot of stats and data, but I think that sometimes that sets the context for the conversation that we're going to have tonight. So Connecticut actually gained 5,300 jobs in October, which is the 10th month of gain in employment, which is great. So you can see that we are on this path to recovery. Connecticut recovered actually 72.8% of the positions that were lost in March and April of 2020. So we are not fully recovered, but I think, you know, we are on that path, which is the good news. I also think that the pandemic, and Marcia, I'm sure you're going to talk a little bit about this since you are right there in it, that the pandemic exacerbated, I think, which was already a labor shortage that hampered Connecticut when you talked about the field of manufacturing. And those are some of the things that we're trying to turn around. So let's kind of pull the lens back a little bit and talk about during the pandemic, who exited the workforce. Women. Yolanda, women exited the workforce at twice the rate of men. And we know why, because of the industries in particular that were hit during the pandemic. Their labor force participation right now is the lowest it's been in over 30 years. Over 30 years, and that's significant because we know that women are the drivers. So if they're not participating in the labor force, it's going to impact all of us. Another, key point is that the only major racial group that lost workers in November of this year is Black women. So on a national level, 91,000 Black women left the labor force, which is huge. And another key fact is that workers without a high school degree also dropped out of the workforce last month. So in the midst of all of these, this progression in getting and recovering, we're also seeing some of these things that are just, making us like kind of step back and saying, well, what's going on here? So what's behind it? I mean, we all can come up with a whole lot of things, I think, but, you hear about people who were thinking about retiring during the pandemic and then all of a sudden said, you know what? It's time. I'm going to do that. I'm going to retire. I always say, let's never underestimate that gig economy. It's become more prominent. Individuals learn to navigate options that were limited in the past. So I ask, prior to the pandemic, how many of us use Instacart every day?
Yeah, exactly. I never heard of it.
Right? You never heard of it, but
Yeah.
now you're like, where is my order? And you get I get thrilled about, maybe it's just me, when they're actually shopping for it and they're saying, hey, take a picture of this. Would you like this and not this? So I think a lot of that we're very familiar with DoorDashes and Grubhubs and, and again, even some of our favorite restaurants that we usually used to go in person now offer that option.
Right.
So that gig economy, I think, Yolanda, has also been very, very prominent in terms of why folks, because those are self-employed positions, right? So why folks have not, turned back into the traditional, as we would call it, kind of labor market. But just to go a little bit further, I think one of the reasons that the shortage is, still, really being exasperated here in this state is that we're underestimating what the pandemic did for folks, right? And how it truly, truly has changed the way we look at the world of work. So, the pandemic was this massively controlled experiment and forcing people to embrace a different way of working. And I think that's what's showing up. People are still scared. Every time we turn around, there's a new variant. We're going through the entire Greek alphabet here. So, it's causing fear for people. What's around the corner? Am I safe? Can I go back? So I think that's part of it as well as, addressing this trauma. But I mean, just to bring it a little bit home that, the most impacted group, if you look at who was laid off when we lost millions of workers out of the labor force overnight, it felt like in 2020, they were low income. People making under $40,000 a year and primarily women of color and those without any type of post-secondary education. And of course, the industries that were hit the hardest were those that didn't have a remote work option. Those of us that worked in offices, we got that opportunity, right? Marcia, if you could have provided remote work, I'm sure you would have, reveled at the option of giving your workers that flexibility. But if you can't do it, you can't do it. And, so I think that, continues today with the labor shortage, especially among women and children. And I'm sure we'll get into a little bit about, the impact of childcare and what that has done. Just think about that.
Absolutely.
You had schools closed for almost 2 years, right? And, we still face interruptions and quarantines. And so how do you, if you are a person who has children, how do you navigate that and go back to work? I think that's something that, and the expense of daycare now, we don't even have time to unpack that, but just having that, I think is a challenge. So women, for the most part, have some limited options, especially when it comes to childcare, and it's a very, very real issue for us. And I think that's, one of the biggest things that has come, out of this, and what has impacted the ability for folks to go back into the workforce. And I always like to say, we took a lot of things for granted, in the fact that, a lot of us who work in offices and things of that, we have the opportunity when our kids were, young, or some of us might still have young children, to get our kids on the bus or, pick them up after school and do those things. if you are an individual who could never even imagine that possibility, because it was just never something you would even fathom that you would be able to do because you were low income and you're working this job, whether it's 7 to 3 or whatever that shift is, you had to be there to clock in. That's why a lot of folks are latchkey kids. You know, I grew up as a latchkey kid. My parents worked in manufacturing. They couldn't get me off the school bus. I had to figure it out. And so just imagine that because of this pandemic, folks in those categories had the opportunity that others took for granted, that they could actually take their kids to school, pick them up. And so now they understood what that means for them and their families. And to now say, okay, I'm going to give all that up and go back. And so we keep saying, okay, we're going to pay you 50 cents more, $1 more. Well, you know what? That $1 more that you're giving me is not worth the value that I'm getting by being able to be there for my child. And I think that's what we underestimate, that the world of work has changed. People's value systems are showing up. And now they have the opportunity, because of a lot of these other things that are going on in the world, to really, really sit back and say, this is what works for my family. And that $1 more an hour is not going to do it.
Right, Adrienne, I mean, what you're saying is so powerful. We've seen a significant sea change in the labor market and in the workforce. And what you're saying about who's been most significantly impacted, you know, it's things are forced to change. And that's really, it's important what you're lifting up. I'm curious to hear more about, you know, what you see as shifts in the labor market as it relates to women, like what you see as changing, what you see coming down, you know, kind of coming down in the future, because we're still in the middle of it. We're still in the middle of this shift.
Absolutely. We are definitely in the middle of the shift. And I think that we as systems, you know, being a part of a workforce development system, but any system and employers, we have to learn that we have to be the change. Because this is what we do. And you know, Sarah will laugh because I talk about the staff all the time. We design programs around what works for us. So we sit here and we say, okay, we work 8:30 to 4:30. So that's the time that you have to get your training in. And wait a minute. And even with employees in shifts, and I'm sure Marcia, I know she's chomping at the bit to jump in here. You know, you have a shift from 7 to 3. Well, what if my kid gets on the bus at 8 o'clock? Now, I can't take this job and I can't work. So even in the workforce development system, we have to be flexible. And it's okay to be flexible. But I think we have so many, you know, generations of this is how the world of work looks and this is how it's structured, that folks aren't there yet. And I mean, if you think about it in a bigger picture, we've always had a change and a sea change. We had industrial revolutions. We had the whole .com technology. This is just another change, of course, on a larger scale, but we have to embrace it, because if we are truly going to be progressive, we can't think that, you know, having flexibility around work is only for people who work in an office or who are wealthy. Because that's not progressive. Right? That is just continuing to cause trauma and impact on those that need us first and that need us the most. And so that's why our systems, and that's what we have to be the change. So our system, our training programs have to be flexible, be responsive, and look at what those barriers are and try to provide for individuals who have those challenges. And employers, you have to be flexible. Because let me tell you, the one thing that wasn't really impacted in this is stock market. Right? So somebody's making money. Let's just be clear about that. Somebody is making money. So the stock market, 401ks are doing quite well. And so there is that ability to be flexible if need be. And I think that now individuals who've been impacted are driving that conversation. And so that's what I see, that we have to, again, we have to actually show up in that way, even in our systems, to help employers to understand, listen, it's not that 50 cents, $1 more an hour that's going to drive that individual to your doorstep or keep them there. that no longer is the great motivator as it was in the past.
Right. So Adrienne, thank you for those really illuminating remarks. I'd like to turn now to Marcia, who is an employer and is, living this every day. So Marcia, can you tell us about how employers such as yourself are doing to attract, what you're doing to attract female employees? Adrienne just shared with us that, women were the most severely impacted by the pandemic, particularly women of color. So I'm curious to hear what you do in order to attract women to manufacturing, because, as Adrienne said, we have to change what we've done in the past if we want to attract the best talent, to keep our economy going. And also any other reactions that you have to what Adrienne has shared and in your own experience and what you're dealing with.
Oh, Sarah's over there laughing. Right? I did. So, well, what I'm doing, what the industry is doing, maybe two different things. And first of all, I'm a small employer, so I can be more creative. I know for us, word of mouth has been important. People who, there's one young lady who was a single mom who was working the third shift at Walmart, who, we, gave a regular working hour job and benefits and a normal life. And, people see that now we have a woman in the shop. I mean, it's just a slowly grinding, process to let people know that there can be accommodations. And again, not to be sexist, if men in our shop need to go and take their kids to the doctors, they get to leave and not worry about, their paycheck being cut because they have to go take their kids to the doctors. And so, but I did want to, that what Adrienne had to say was so well said, and I appreciate your putting it out there for us all, Adrienne. I think the problems obviously preceded the pandemic. They've just been magnified, if you will. So this has been a big conversation. I think that, as a whole, the industry has spent an enormous amount of time, and rightfully so, of trying to say that, manufacturing, what it is, just change the dynamic and the perception of what manufacturing is. The conversation about where women fit in. You'd be hard pressed to find women who think that themselves as being people who would be eligible or capable or whatever even go there. There's a whole nother, for lack of a better word, maybe marketing campaign that needs to happen to, get people thinking about that. And it will be driven by money, not 50 cents an hour, Adrienne, but, real money. And as everybody who's here has heard me say, I think it's time to get beyond creative. I think that the other day we were in a meeting with, I was the only woman manufacturer. Some of you were on that call, and people think they're doing something in this area, the men folk there, but they're really not, and they don't know what to do. And so helping maybe to rewrite that is where we can all collectively come together. Is that making sense, what I'm trying to say there?
Absolutely.
I think the average school hours for our children, regardless whether they're middle school or high school, is 6.47 hours here in Connecticut. So there's no way there's an 8-hour working day happening from somebody, who did or didn't stay home. It just isn't happening. And childcare is not, what happens when you have middle school kids? Anybody been down that road? Right? I mean, middle school is not a childcare issue. What do you do with your middle school kids, when they can't drive and they can't work? And, we have to think, like, put ourselves, we've been there, put ourselves in those situations, advocate for ourselves. And maybe here in Greater New Haven County, we can come up with a fabulous answer about how to make that happen. I have ideas. I'd be happy to share them, but I'm sure Sarah wants to weigh in too. So,
yeah, Sarah, what are you thinking as we're in this conversation about, manufacturing careers for women? What needs to change, and what are the opportunities?
Absolutely, and I'm glad to be here. Thank you so much for having me. The first thing that comes to mind for me, and I do kind of have a story to go along with this, but for me in my career, one thing that's been incredibly important is having another woman in a leadership position to nurture and groom and train me into my current role. Thankfully, that's Adrienne for me. So I'm very lucky to have that. But if you think about a woman of any age going into a manufacturing company and seeing either very few women or in some circumstances for our participants, no other women, who's there to nurture her in a way that only another woman can. So I think that's a place to start is, looking at the company leadership. Do we have women in leadership positions, and do we have female mentors who can bring up the next generation? And I think that kind of goes into normalizing women in manufacturing careers. I also think, what Marcia said about the perception. I think there's a perception, a very popular and long-held perception that manufacturing requires hard manual labor, that women might not be well qualified or suited for those roles, that it's old-fashioned, it's dirty, the hours are long, and the positions aren't as lucrative as other professions. And those are very outdated belief systems. For the most part, today's manufacturers they're clean, they're safe. Most companies offer many different types of employee training or apprenticeship opportunities, sort of that planned career development pathway, so that even if you are starting out entry level, there's a path if you continue with that on-the-job learning, and always be a lifelong learner. You're going to move up and your wages are going to increase. The other thing I think that's particularly interesting about this moment in time right now for the sector is that manufacturing, the workforce shortage, they're kind of at a tipping point at the moment. The industry's grown in Connecticut. There are over 6,000 job openings at any time in manufacturing, and employers need a diverse workforce if they are going to continue. And so, we hold a lot of power right now to say, here's what I need to be able to come and do this job. And so I think not being afraid to kind of speak up about that, certainly doing research, there's always good companies and bad companies, right? But I think through the pandemic, most of the companies that I talk to have a little bit of a better understanding that they do have to be flexible. The one quick story I'll share, we had a young woman who had just graduated from a one-year certificate program at Housatonic Community College. It was a manufacturing program, and she actually started classes in high school when she was at Derby High School. And when she signed up for the class, it was the first time that the high school was ever offering a manufacturing class. She told me how she went out into the hallway and she went up to all of her friends and said, "Okay, so who's doing this course?" And they all looked at her like she was crazy. And she was in there with a bunch of her male counterpart students, and she loved it. And so she went on to this program at Housatonic, and she ended up choosing an apprenticeship position because there was that mentorship aspect where she'd be learning on the job. Apprenticeships come with wage increases every 1,000 hours, and it's a career plan. So at the end of the apprenticeship, what you're going to be trained to be able to do, and you're much more marketable. But one of the things that she called me after her first day to talk about was how many women were on the manufacturing floor. So I think a lot of that comes back to the employer of what are you doing to attract and promote women who can then train and nurture the next generation of women coming into the workforce.
Sarah, thanks for sharing that really powerful story. And it really is important to understand how women, right, young women, women who are working age, like how they find out about these careers. And Marcia, you said earlier that a marketing campaign is going to be necessary in order for women to understand what these career opportunities are about. And you all know that our career pathways, workforce development system, there are so many different pieces and parts to it that it's going to take all of us to really support a pathway that's cohesive, whether it's in manufacturing, whether it's in healthcare or other growth sectors. So I'm just curious to hear what your thoughts are about that and, what that could look like.
Well, I think that, like to Sarah's point, having examples and models that people can look to, so they're not so out of the ordinary, to be able to, showcase and broadcast and a different kind of Me Too movement, if you will, like, yes, I can do it. I do think, though, that a conversation about employers, though, is becoming clear to me, and maybe Sarah and Adrienne can speak to this too, but that manufacturers are feeling like they have to worry about perception within their own companies of giving special allowances or whatnot to women. And so there's a lot of things. I know that's not what you were talking about necessarily there, Yolanda, but if you want to look at it in its totality,
Sure.
If you say to someone, hypothetically, you can work 25 hours a week. We have a job, 25 hours a week. And wait, if you want to go 30 hours, then you're eligible for benefits, right? I mean, that's the law, 30 hours. I actually heard a gentleman say, well, that's not fair to my people who are working on the floor. The guys are working on the floor for 40 hours. And that really kind of, I don't know what to do with that. And that's very recent. So I'm just kind of sharing that. Do you?
That is the craziest thing I've ever heard.
I honestly, I heard that just this week.
Yeah, that is quite shocking because, I mean, let's talk about, that's unfair, right? That's unfair. Is it, well, we can get into what the unfairness looks like for women in this society, and especially trying to embark on these jobs, which are, like, as we said, we're careers, right? We're not talking about a job. We're talking about getting folks into careers. So, if we're talking about having an inclusive society, right, not just an inclusive employer, then I hope we will shift this narrative about, and seek to understand and develop solutions that are not looking to give people a handout, but a hand up. So I think that's a part of educating, clearly, the men, whoever said that, about what that looks like. And, maybe I'm a little biased, I probably am, but I'm sure, and Marcia, you could tell me, since you're the employer and you see men and women, not for this particular situation, but, that I'm sure women could probably get that work done. And they didn't need to work those 40 or 50 hours. They could probably get it done in that 25, 30 hours and still have time to spare.
Well, I think we all agree, right? Because we are natural problem solvers, we are efficient, and for our lifestyle, we have to put that there. That I've got to believe that, somebody who's working 25 or 30 hours is certainly putting forth an equivalent to 40 hours worth of work under normal conditions.
Yeah. So, yeah, and Adrienne, I'm glad you brought that up, and Marcia, my next question is about how can women or how are women poised to thrive in manufacturing? And you started to touch upon that. So I'd love to hear more.
I think advocating, obviously, I mean, it's something we all agree on. Everyone in this call advocates and what that looks like. And I think we just have to help guide people in that direction of what those should be, and simultaneously float those ideas in the manufacturing community where we are, that this is something that maybe they ought to be considering. In my mind, I don't care whether you're a man or a woman, but particularly if you're a woman, wouldn't it be great if you were able to bank personal hours so that you can leave and take your child to the doctor? Because even if you were to work 25 hours, 5 hours a day, right? And work like nobody's business and get done what you got to do, doesn't mean that there's not an emergency or there's a doctor's appointment, like I said, or something, a parent teacher conference, something that you have to go to. Wouldn't it be novel? Because what are those things that women want to stay home for? It's not so they can sit around and hug their kids, it's so they can be present and be available. And be there when they have to be there. So how do we translate that into a reality? I think our fathers should be able to do that too. But mostly our women, I'm just saying. I don't know, what do you guys think? I mean, does that make sense?
No, I
Yes.
think it absolutely does make sense. And, you know, and I think when you talk about how do we begin to get, you know, not only employers, but women interested in manufacturing, I mean, that's huge. We have to start talking careers early. And, you know, and I think, you know, society has tried to do some different things about, you know, encouraging young girls in the areas of, you know, STEM and science and manufacturing and making it more appealing, because I think we've done so much damage over, you know, decades of, you know, training young girls to believe they're not good at science. That, you know, oh, you're not good at math, don't worry about it, honey. And so we're trying to unpack that now. So I think we have to start early, talk about how this is a pathway, demystify manufacturing. I know you guys, I see some of these OJTs, IWTs that Sarah, I'm like, well, what job is that? What is that? Demystifying it for folks so that I don't know what this job is. I know what it means to be X, but I don't know what it means to be this in this industry. So I think that is so important, and highlight the areas of potential growth, not only in income, but personal growth, and how you can be a leader in that industry. You can be the supervisor, you can be the director, or whatever the, you know, hierarchy is in the manufacturer. Those are the things, and those conversations have to start very early. And I think those are the things that start to turn, because I do believe, as you said, you know, women, and because we're natural caregivers, right? Whether it's for our children or for our, you know, aging parents, that's what we do. That we are starting to understand how we can be present and live in the present. And so I would hope that the men on the shop floor too would be worried about the doctor's appointment and picking up the child and doing those things too, because what we set up in this world to benefit women will benefit men. And so until we really start to have those conversations, I think we're just going to, you know, continue in this circle, in this cycle. So we are very creative people in this country. And so I think manufacturers are innovators. And so I think they can develop those solutions if they come to the table.
You would agree, you would agree though that there are two different things going on though. They're recruiting and they're presenting the opportunities to the young folks, and then the not quite so young, I'm not saying near retirement, of folks and bringing them back into this space. I mean,
Absolutely.
Everyone keeps talking about, listen, just give me a well-spoken individual who can read and write, and I will turn them into a manufacturing pro. So there are those women out there now who could start a career at 30, 35. I'm not saying that's old, you know what I'm saying? 30, 35, as you know, and actually have tremendous earning potential, even at this stage. And there's not a category for that. We fund recruiting young people out of school. We fund incumbent worker training. We don't fund that middle spot that we're all saying lives out there right now. I mean, those people are there. You know, if they weren't there before the pandemic, they're there now. So how do we get them back in?
Right. And that's one thing the workforce development system does. And I know even in New Haven area, you know, our sister organization, Workforce Alliance, you know, all of us are working diligently trying to lure individuals back into this. But again, I think in manufacturing, and you know, and Sarah can speak to it, again, it's this mystifying thing. What is manufacturing? What am I going to do? And what does that mean for me? And so we need to have more people like Marcia out there saying women do this. Women actually own the company. You know, we can do that too, so that now folks can see, oh, it's not what I thought it was. It's not what my parents and grandparents did. And it's not, you know, checking in, checking out, that I can have a career in this. And that's the conversation that has to be in coordination and collaboration with the workforce system as well as the employer. Because we can talk about it, but you are going to actually show them how to be about it. So it has to be a partnership in order for us to bring people into this wonderful industry that continues to grow in Connecticut.
Absolutely. Yeah, and Sarah, would love to hear your thoughts about that, about positioning women to thrive in manufacturing. And I also want to turn the conversation to, we've talked about barriers, right? We've talked about childcare, transportation. I also want to understand from all of you, like, what are the barriers that need to be addressed so that we can position women to be successful in manufacturing careers?
Yeah, I mean, I can respond from, being involved in training initiatives. We see, out of every class cohort of 16 individuals who we put into, 8 to 10 week manufacturing training, usually about a fourth are women, and it's not for lack of trying. Even when we go to high schools, the people who show up at the information session are typically male. And so again, I think that goes back to that early career education. And then, this is a little taboo, but I also think we have to be willing to refuse to employ and refuse to continue employing people in the workplace who demonstrate sexist attitudes. I have, seen that in my work, and thankfully the employers that I've worked with, when this happens, it's not tolerated, but it is still happening. And so, we had one employer who we placed a young woman. It was a welding job, and they didn't have they had a male bathroom and no female bathroom on site. So they built a female bathroom before she started her job. And then, the men who were there didn't respond kindly to, her being around, and she left. And so they are back to having no females in the workplace. It's frankly disgusting. But these things are still happening in some places, and most companies are not like this. So I don't want to paint that as the normalized perception, but
right.
This kind of thing is still happening. And so whoever it is, man or woman, you have to stand up and say, we are not going to tolerate this in the workplace at all. And if you don't, your workforce is going to suffer, and your business and your bottom line is going to suffer. In terms of, I think women are natural problem solvers. The women I know, manufacturing or not, work twice as hard to get it done, no matter what it takes. And then we do have, those creative problem solving skills, multitasking skills. So, I think the women who we've had in training and employment, they're all working, and they're all working good jobs, and they're in apprenticeship programs. So, from my experience, if we can get them to the point of, okay, I'm going to give this a shot, they do really well. But I do think a clear path for advancement is really important. The mentorship, like I talked about, and equal pay for equal work. In some instances, we're still talking about that one, which we really shouldn't be. And then work-life balance options, and not even just for women, but what Adrienne was talking about earlier with COVID, changing the way that people value their family time, their hobbies and their interests. We do have to be flexible with that. It's not all about, work all day, grind all day, and then go home and do it all again anymore. And so how can we, allow people to have flexible time off when things come up? Childcare, like Adrienne said, that's a hard nut to crack. I can talk a little bit about what we do at the workplace for training programs.
Sure.
Before we even get into getting someone a job, if someone comes into our office and we're talking about a training program, we have a dedicated staff person whose job it is to talk about what barriers can we help you overcome so that you can just get into training. So things like affording childcare, finding childcare. Our programs provide transportation assistance. The public transportation system in Connecticut is still really, really lacking. So if you don't have a way to get to a bus stop, you're not taking the bus to training or to your job. So being creative about, providing bus passes, train passes, but, Uber and Lyft. And we actually have a driver who will come pick you up at your house to take you to training. And then all those little things that we don't think about, do you have Wi-Fi at home? Because if not, how are you going to complete the online training module?
Right.
Chromebooks. So it's really, and I have to credit Adrienne for this, she always talks about serving the whole person and the whole family. So making sure that we have wraparound support services in training initiatives to address all of the barriers that could potentially be present, and then doing that in a loving way, and not a way that's embarrassing, but that's empowering.
Great. Thanks, Sarah. Adrienne?
No, I was going to say, that's what I was going to say. We are very, very committed to treating that whole person. You got to meet people where they are. And I think, part of our success is we are very committed and intentional about that, if folks have things going on in their life, we got to work on that before you are going to be able to progress. If I'm coming to class every day hungry because I haven't had any food, or I don't know what happened the night before to make me, and I got here today, all those things that, can impede an individual in their career. And so, we really take that very, very seriously, because you will never convince me that people don't want to do well in their lives and they don't want to do well for their children. You will never convince me. I don't care what zip code they come from. You will never be able to convince me that everybody at their core wants to be successful, and they want their families to be successful and enjoy this America promised. And so I think it's incumbent upon us to figure out how we can, again, like I said, provide people a hand up, not a hand out. And if that means we have to change our systems a little bit, and we have to be a little bit uncomfortable in how we deliver things, then that's what we do. And so those barriers are, food and transportation and housing and all those things in that Alice report that say that these are, we have this conversation all the time, as we know, right? So we know what those barriers are. It's about not just listing them or putting them in some report. It's about really, really being intentional about how we're going to solve this, because it not only impacts those individuals that are coming through our door every day, it impacts all of us. And it impacts employers, good employers like Marcia, who's doing the best she can. And going back to what we need, again, we need champions. We need women champions that are out there, that are on posters. You don't have to be Rosie the Riveter, right, Marcia? But you can, there's something in manufacturing, but those are the things that start to change. And if we don't do that, we're not going to. So I'm looking to Marcia to lead that effort and gather all those women manufacturers and say, you know what, we're going to do this.
Well, I think, you're absolutely right. The onus at some point transfers over to the people who run the companies, and they don't have to be the owners. They can be the management people. But I mean, a sorority, if you will, of people who want to come together and be there, that are filling whatever gap, because when the training is over, it's still on the manufacturers to make it all happen. They have to put with the good work that you're all doing to make sure that you're reaching out and looking at the whole person and translate that into an employer's responsibility. And that's a human call. And there are certain businesses that cannot look beyond what that dollar sign is going to be. And that's where I think you have to step up. I said this all to you a couple of days ago. I mean, walk in, and I can see myself walking into a potential employer saying, yeah, I can do that job. I get it done in 25 hours a week. This is what it is I want, and this is what it's worth. But people help me along the way. I mean, I'm naturally bold, I think, but people help me along the way to get bolder. And I think that's what we have to do, for ourselves. Every mother out there would defend her kid right to the bone, right? The tiger mom can take a little bit of that for themselves and go, yeah, I'm going to own it. I'm tough. I can do this.
Thanks, Marcia. So we have some questions in our Q&A box. So I want to make sure we get to these in the time that we have remaining. So we have a question. Thanks for this important conversation. I'd love to hear the panelists address the generational aspects of this theme. How do we encourage younger women to pursue careers in manufacturing, given the challenges highlighted by this pandemic?
I think younger women are already about it. They're bold and they are not afraid to speak their minds, which I think is 90% of the time awesome. And again, the women that almost all young women that we have in training programs, they absolutely excel in the classroom portion of training, and then from everything I hear from employers, are doing very well. And a lot of these employers have big plans for the people who we've placed so far. I think one thing that we recently did is we had a event at a high school. It was a virtual event with, I think, 7 local high schools, and we had the young woman I was speaking about earlier. She spoke to the high school students about her experience.
That's
and
great.
So I think that peer-to-peer sharing is so powerful. It's one thing for somebody in the company who's middle-aged come and talk about what a great career he's had, but imagine hearing from someone 2 years older than you about the fact that they're going to buy a car with no car payment in 2 years. That's powerful.
Sarah, as you were saying, you were about to say what you just shared about the young woman that with the story that you shared earlier. I was thinking, oh my God, it has to be part of this marketing campaign. We're putting it together right here. That's fantastic. Marcia?
I think a marketing campaign, that would mean to be mobile, to be able to, take the bus, go to the schools, have the kids come out, have young people out there, whatever face-to-face we can possibly make happen. Invite the teachers, invite the parents. I mean, it's going to take funding to make that happen, but to be able to travel to, in every area, all the middle schools, all the high schools, the guidance counselors are there. It's a big deal, but it's one-on-one, it's personal. The person that, like Sarah was saying, you can look up to, that has done it and is doing it. And creating a team of girls who say, yeah, I can do this, and then go on to the next one.
Exactly. Yeah. And building on that first question, what resources can one use to research the different type of manufacturing opportunities that are available in the area?
Well, I can just say you could just go into LinkedIn. I mean, go into any one of the Indeed or anything like that, and you're just going to see people trying to say, machinists come work here. Companies all around, companies we all know that are local, just come. And obviously, calling your workforce board will be there too, but it's right out there in the open. Craigslist, people are desperate. They're writing everywhere they possibly can to reach people. I can't speak to the agencies, like the temp agencies or anything like that. I don't really know how that's being used right now, but.
Yeah, I think in terms of training, the American Job Centers, they're located across the state, or the workforce boards. I mean, there's so much funding right now for manufacturing training because it is a growing sector in Connecticut. There are lots of different training programs available that are outside of your traditional 4-year college degree or even your high school program. So if you're someone who, it isn't already kind of in the pipeline for one of those more traditional training programs, there are lots of different options right now.
Yeah, and it would actually be great as a follow-up to today's convening to put a resource list together to share with everyone who's registered to help get the word out for folks that are interested in either themselves pursuing careers in manufacturing, or for programs and organizations that are helping to connect women to careers in manufacturing. So yeah, so again, like we said earlier, it's about how do we make this something cohesive so that, you can go to one place and find what you need to pursue and to explore these really, these fast growing careers. All right, so we have another question. All of the additional services that you talked about, like childcare, transportation, and such are great programmatic issues. These are systemic issues impacting individuals. How do you convey these systemic issues to those empowered to make a difference? Would like to start on that one.
I think that, how do we convey it? I think we have to keep talking about it because they aren't things that are just going to go away overnight. And we know that it takes a lot of resources, and these are fiscal resources as well as human resources to kind of move some of these issues to continue to be in the forefront and coming up with solutions, which is challenging. So, you have, wonderful organizations like the Community Foundation for Greater New Haven and the great work that the Fund for Women and Girls is doing is really talking about these issues and really bringing them out there, and not just a one and done, but saying, listen, this is what these barriers are, and we have to continue to try to change that. Now, some of the, as Sarah just talked about, a lot of funding is coming to this state, just in terms of infrastructure funding. And, if we get the Build Back Better, if it can get through the Senate and whatever form it may take, those are dollars that are going to come into these communities. And as I said, when you look at all this funding that has come, whether it's from the CARES Act, American Rescue Plan, the infrastructure plan, and the Build Back America plan, this is a once in a lifetime, right? We will
Absolutely.
never in our lifetime see this much money coming in to help with those infrastructure things, whether it's, human infrastructure or our infrastructure. We're talking about our roads and our bridges and those things. We got to seize this moment. We can't just spend this money away and do a peanut butter approach and spread it across. We have to be intentional and focused if we want to really make some huge changes for this to impact future generations. This is a time for us to not think about it's going to impact us, because it probably won't. We have to be thinking forward and thinking about how it's going to impact our children, our grandchildren, and our great-grandchildren, and how we can make this world a better place. So I think that's what we really need to focus on. Keep talking about it. Don't let anybody stop. As Sarah said, be bold and keep having those conversations. To anybody that will listen. So we'll have the champion with Marcia on the employers, and Sarah will get her trainees. That will be the champions for the recruitment of getting young women and girls into manufacturing. And we right here in Connecticut will be the leaders in this country in making a difference in manufacturing and bringing women some equity in this industry.
Can I piggyback on that really quickly?
Yep.
I believe that you're absolutely 100% right. We have to keep talking about it. And I believe that with all my heart that people hear that they need this help, that, you know what I mean? That women need help to be able to make this transition. But I don't think people know what to do. And I think there's a visual component. Maybe it's because I'm very visual myself. I mean, if someone were to take a camera as part of a campaign and just demonstrate what it takes for some woman and then another one, and start their day, to the end of the day with putting dinner on the table, getting the kids, what it takes to get that woman, what she has to go through. Okay. Like if she can get to the training, can she get to the job? You know what I mean?
Right.
Can she get back on the bus schedule, have dinner on the table for those children? I mean, I think I think when we're talking about it, maybe we're having a broader conversation that's somehow still more specific, because we're actually looking at what it looks like.
Yep, exactly. So we're going to have to leave the conversation here. And this will not be the last conversation that we have, because this work is so critical and so important. I want to thank Adrienne Parkmond, Sarah Lewis, Marcia LaFemina for a very rich discussion, for really delving into the current challenges that we're facing in this labor market, and the really major opportunities for women, particularly women of color, to get into these careers and to really achieve family economic security, and for us to really build an inclusive economy in Greater New Haven. And with that, I'll turn it over to Christine Kim, Vice Chair for the Community Fund for Women and Girls.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Yolanda, for moderating today, and our amazing speakers, Adrienne, Marcia, and Sarah, for being here to guide us through concrete and needed solutions as we move forward. I think we know that that we cannot build back better, recover from the pandemic, recession, or continuing social and economic inequities unless we center the needs of women in regards to the labor market. A woman in labor is the beginning of everyone's lives, and it's high time that we focus we focus on women and center them as we move forward to ensure economic security and any kind of recovery and growth. I wanted to, in addition to thanking our speakers for helping us and guiding decision makers for the needed paths to go forward, I also want to just make brief announcements in terms of the Fund for Women and Girls newsletter will be out very shortly. And we ask all of you who have attended today, thank you so much for attending. And there will be a survey at the close of the webinar, and we'd love if you could give us some feedback. And as we move to this convening and others in the future. And it is an honor to connect with all of you. Thank you for the Community Foundation for Greater New Haven. And again, to all of our panelists and the amazing staff at the Community Foundation for organizing this event. And everyone, please be safe and take care, and onward as we continue to fight this fight. So thank you.
Thank you. Good night, everybody.